The year Xavier Knight returned to the country, he had become a world-renowned billionaire. But everyone in New York's elite circle knew he hated me to the bone. 3 years ago, when his illness was at its worst, I took $10 million from his biggest rival, slapped him in public, and told him to get the hell out of my life. So when we met again, he used his power to force me into becoming his on-call secret mistress. He would sit in his VIP booth, sipping champagne and sneering as he watched me strip dance at private parties, just to make a few bucks from wealthy investors. Eva, you abandoned me for money back then. Now, your pathetic body is only fit to crawl and beg for my pocket change. That same night, he threw his engagement invitation to another wealthy heiress right in my face. I numbly wiped the blood from my forehead where the sharp edge of the card had cut me, and slowly picked it up. He thought I would throw away my remaining dignity and beg him to stay, just like I always did. But he didn't know that I was running out of time. I had spent every single penny of that $10 million on his medical bills back then. And my right ear had been beaten to complete deafness years ago when I shielded him from a mob. Now I was dying. The blood from my forehead dripped down my eyelashes, staining the gold-trimmed red invitation. Eva, the day after tomorrow is my engagement party with Melody. If you want to come and beg for some leftovers, I won't stop you. Xavier looked down at me from his height, his eyes filled with pure disgust. My right ear was ringing constantly. Only my left ear could barely catch his words. Melody was my sister, the biological, pampered daughter of the Sinclair family. While I was just a walking medical backup, adopted from an orphanage solely to keep her alive whenever her failing organs needed a match. Silent. Xavier ground the sole of his leather shoe onto my fingers. The pain shot straight to my heart, making me tremble violently. He bent down, pinching my chin with disgust, forcing me to look up. You were so loud when you took the money and slapped me. What happened? Are you mute now? Or do you think you didn't make enough from dancing tonight, so you're playing hard to get again? I used every ounce of my strength to pull my hand out from under his shoe. You worry too much, Xavier. I'll take the invitation. I wish you too, a lifetime of happiness. He visibly froze. He probably didn't expect me to be this calm. In the 6 months since we reunited, I had let him humiliate me like a dog just to pay off the massive debts I owed to the loan sharks. I had even knelt and bowed to the floor in public just for the thousands of dollars he carelessly tossed at me. He thought I would throw a fit, crying and begging him not to marry someone else. But he didn't know that thanks to his cruel generosity, my debts were finally paid off. And just this morning, I had received my diagnosis: terminal brain cancer. The doctor said the blood clot in my brain was pressing against my nerves. I had 2 months left at most. That clot was formed 3 years ago, when his rival pinned me against a concrete wall and beat my head repeatedly with a metal pipe. My right ear had gone completely deaf that night too, but now telling him would change nothing. Eva, you'd better not play any tricks on me. Xavier shoved my face away and aggressively wiped his hands with a wet wipe, as if he had touched something filthy. A gold digger like you doesn't even deserve to be compared to a single hair on Melody's head. He threw the dirty wet wipe in my face and stormed out of the VIP room. The moment the door slammed shut, I collapsed onto the freezing floor. I was so tired. My hearing aid had been knocked out when he threw the invitation, rolling away into some dark corner. Just like me, forgotten by the world. Right then, the door opened again. Melody walked in, wearing a stunning designer gown. She looked down at me on the floor and giggled, covering her mouth. Oh Eva, look at you. How pathetic. She knelt down and lowered her voice. Eva, haven't you always wondered how Xavier managed to get that massive investment to launch his business abroad so easily back then? I looked up at her blankly. Because I intercepted the money you got for him and gave it to him under my own name. Melody's smile grew wider. You were beaten half to death by the casino loan sharks just to pay his medical bills. And that $10 million you sacrificed your life for? It became the very reason he hates you. Thanks for paving the way for me, Eva. Now he's all mine. I looked at Melody's smug face, but I couldn't even bring myself to be angry. What was the point of arguing anymore? It had been 3 years. If Xavier had trusted me even for a second, he would have checked the hospital payment records. Or he would have looked into why I was being hunted by loan sharks right after he left. But he never did. He only believed what he saw. He only believed that I took his rival's check, slapped him, and told him to get lost. Melody. I supported myself against the wall and stood up, my head spinning. He's yours. Keep him. My calmness made Melody's face twitch. Just as she was about to snap, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Melody, are you done? Xavier pushed the door open and walked in. Melody's eyes instantly welled with tears, and she deliberately threw herself toward the glass coffee table nearby. Ah! Her wrist scraped against the sharp edge of the table, leaving a bright red scratch. Eva, why did you push me? I just wanted to make sure you got the invitation. Xavier rushed over instantly, shielding Melody in his arms. He glared at me, his eyes filled with pure rage. Eva, do you have a death wish? Despite the sharp ringing in my ears, I found the situation utterly ridiculous. I didn't push her. Xavier didn't hesitate to strike my face. The force of his slap sent me crashing to the floor, and the taste of blood filled my mouth. My fragile brain nerves throbbed in excruciating pain, and my vision began to turn black. That was to teach you some manners. Xavier looked at me as if I were a piece of trash. You threw me away like a dog when I was sick just for some cash, and now you're jealous enough to hurt your own sister. Eva, you're not just pathetic. You're evil. My left ear began to ring violently too. The world instantly fell into dead silence. I saw his lips moving, but I couldn't hear a single word he was saying. As it turned out, complete silence wasn't scary. It was actually quite peaceful. Melody sobbed in his arms, and he gently picked her up, looking at her with deep worry. Before leaving, he threw a credit card onto my body. There's $50,000 in there. Consider this the final payoff to end whatever we had. Get out of New York and never show your face in front of Melody again. Otherwise, I have 1,000 ways to make your life a living hell. Money. It was always about money. I wiped the blood from my lip and slowly picked up the card. The contempt in Xavier's eyes deepened as he carried Melody out of the room. The next day, I went back to the Sinclair estate. I only wanted to pack a few of my old clothes before checking myself into a quiet hospice care facility in the suburbs to spend my remaining days. As soon as I walked in, I heard Mrs. Sinclair talking on the phone in the living room, her voice dripping with flattery and joy. Yes, Melody and Xavier are getting engaged the day after tomorrow. You must come. When she hung up and saw me, her smile instantly vanished. What are you doing back here, you curse? Haven't you embarrassed us enough? Mrs. Sinclair snatched my bag and dumped everything onto the floor. A few faded old shirts fell out, along with an unlabeled bottle of painkillers. She poked my forehead aggressively with her finger and spat out insults. You disgraced this family for a few dirty bucks back then. Now that Xavier is incredibly rich, you shamelessly crawl back to be his mistress. How did I give birth to a shameless whore like you? Why can't you be more like your sister and behave yourself? I numbly knelt down to pick up my clothes. Indeed, why couldn't I be Melody? Why was it that despite being daughters of the same household, she was pampered like a princess while I was born only to provide bone marrow for her? Just as I reached for my pill bottle, Mrs. Sinclair's high heel stomped heavily onto the back of my hand. Did you hear me talking to you? Are you trying to ruin your sister's engagement party? Her sharp heel ground viciously into my knuckles. My left ear had recovered a tiny bit of hearing, just in time to catch her shrill curses. Mom, let it go. Melody walked down the stairs, holding Xavier's arm. They really were inseparable now. Melody walked over and gently pulled Mrs. Sinclair back, acting like a sweet, understanding angel. Eva hasn't had it easy lately. Even though she has a bad reputation for drinking and strip dancing for men at VIP lounges, she's just trying to survive. When Xavier heard drinking and strip dancing, his expression darkened. He was the one who had forced me to do those things. Take your trash and get out. Ignoring the blood dripping from the back of my hand, I grabbed my clothes and the pill bottle, turning to leave. Just as I reached the foyer, a sudden, blinding headache struck. It felt as though someone were drilling into my brain with a power tool. My knees buckled, and I crashed heavily to the floor. Playing victim again? Mrs. Sinclair sneered. Eva, you've been playing this tragic act for 20 years. Aren't you tired of it? A metallic taste rose in my throat, and I bit my lip hard. I couldn't throw up. I couldn't spit blood in front of them. I forced myself to swallow the blood and used the doorframe to pull myself up. I won't bother you anymore. I pushed the door open and stumbled out into the pouring rain. The cold wind and freezing rain beat against my body, chilling me to the bone. Once I ran past the gates of the wealthy estate, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I leaned against a trash can on the curb and threw up a massive pool of blood. The dark red blood mixed with the rainwater, looking terrifying on the wet concrete. I leaned against the brick wall, gasping for breath, and took out my phone. I transferred all the money I had saved over the past 3 years, including the $50,000 Xavier had thrown at me, to the director of the orphanage who had taken care of me when I was a child. Director, please use this money for the kids. I'm going on a long trip, and I don't think I'll be coming back. After sending the message, I threw my phone into the trash can. There was nothing left for me in this city. I found a cheap, remote motel and spent my days swallowing handfuls of cheap painkillers. My body decayed rapidly. My vision began to blur, my hearing completely vanished, and my world turned into a dark, silent void. It hurt. It hurt so much. Every night, I would writhe in agony on the cold motel floor. I dug my fingernails deep into my own flesh until they bled, using the sharp physical pain just to keep myself conscious. Eventually, I didn't even have the strength to crawl to the sink for a cup of water. I knew my end was near. On the last day of my life, I dreamed of Xavier from 3 years ago. Back then, he wasn't this cold and heartless. He was terribly sick, lying in our tiny rented basement, holding my hand tightly as he said, Eva, once I get better, I'll marry you. I'll make sure you're the happiest girl in New York." Back then, I smiled like a fool. For those words, I willingly went to beg his dangerous, mob-connected rival. I let dozens of men pin me down, break my ribs, beat me until my ear bled, and force me to sign a massive high-interest loan. But I got the $10 million that saved his life. I went back to him covered in blood. To make sure he would focus on his treatment without worrying about me, I threw the money in his face and slapped him hard. "Xavier, you're a useless cripple. I'm done playing house with you." His eyes at that moment looked as desperate and broken as a dying animal. When I woke up from the dream, my body was twitching with pain. In the pitch black, I fumbled around and grabbed a small metal box from the nightstand. Inside was a blood-stained hospital critical condition notice from 3 years ago, and the loan contract that had long been paid off. I hugged the metal box tightly against my chest, as if holding on to my ridiculous, short life. If there is a next life, Xavier, I hope I never meet you again. Today was the day of Xavier and Melody's engagement party. In the grand ballroom of New York's most luxurious 5-star hotel, Mrs. Sinclair, dressed in an expensive designer gown, moved gracefully among the wealthy guests, basking in their compliments. "Mrs. Sinclair, you are so blessed. Melody is marrying Mr. Knight. She's going to live like a queen for the rest of her life." "Oh, thank you. Melody has always been a sweet girl, and Xavier is a very loyal man." Mrs. Sinclair couldn't stop smiling. Xavier stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, wearing a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, and holding a glass of champagne. He stared out at the gloomy sky, feeling an inexplicable sense of anxiety. His eyelid had been twitching all morning. Since dawn, he had been waiting for Eva to call him. He knew Eva too well. That woman would do anything for money. She had no dignity left. On an occasion like this, she would definitely show up to make a scene, or kneel before him to beg for money. To prevent that, he had specifically hired a dozen extra security guards to patrol the entrance. If she dared to show up, he would crush her remaining self-respect right in front of New York's high society. But the ceremony was about to start, and there was still no sign of Eva at the gates. "Xavier, what are you looking at?" Melody, dressed in a gorgeous white gown, walked over and sweetly wrapped her arms around his. Xavier snapped out of his thoughts, hiding his impatience. "Nothing." "Are you waiting for Eva?" Melody pouted, her voice dripping with fake sadness. "Eva is so petty. I even sent her an invitation myself. Even if she's mad at me, she shouldn't play missing on such an important day." Mrs. Sinclair walked over and let out a cold snort. "It's better if she doesn't show up. We don't need her filthy, pathetic presence ruining our day. Why even mention that jinx on such a happy occasion?" Xavier tightened his grip on his champagne glass. Yes, it was better if she didn't show up. But why did his chest feel so empty? As if a vital piece of his heart had been ripped out. The romantic music began to play, and the host took the stage to announce the start of the ceremony. Xavier set down his glass and took Melody's hand. Right then, the heavy double doors of the ballroom were slammed open. 2 police officers in uniform walked in, followed by a couple of forensic medical examiners in white coats. The noisy ballroom instantly fell silent. Everyone turned their eyes to the door. Xavier frowned, the uneasy feeling in his chest suddenly magnifying 100 times. The officers walked straight to the stage, their eyes sweeping over the crowd before landing on Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair. "Are you the family of Eva Sinclair?" Mrs. Sinclair's smile froze, and she immediately spat out in irritation. What trouble did that useless girl cause this time? "Officer, we kicked her out of our house a long time ago. Whatever she did has absolutely nothing to do with the Sinclair family." Xavier let go of Melody's hand and took a step forward, his voice suddenly tightening. "What happened to her?" The leading officer pulled out a transparent evidence bag. Inside was a rusted, blood-stained metal box and a broken, cheap hearing aid. "We found the body of Ms. Eva Sinclair in a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city. According to the preliminary forensic report, she passed away yesterday at approximately 2 a.m. The cause of death was multiple organ failure caused by a severe, untreated blood clot in her brain. We couldn't reach her emergency contact, so we had to trace her family registry to find you." The silence in the grand ballroom was so heavy it felt suffocating. The crystal chandeliers overhead cast a brilliant, merciless light over the 100-odd guests of New York's high society. For a second, no one moved. The romantic music had stopped abruptly, replaced by the low, humming buzz of the air conditioning unit. Xavier stood frozen on the velvet-covered stage. The glass of champagne in his hand felt unnaturally heavy. What did you just say?" Xavier's voice was barely a whisper, but in the silent room, it carried with chilling clarity. The lead detective, Detective Vance, didn't flinch. He adjusted his stance, his expression hardened by years of dealing with the city's worst tragedies. "I said, Mr. Knight, that Ms. Eva Sinclair was found dead in a motel room in Queens at 2 o'clock this morning. We are here to locate next of kin to sign the body release forms and inventory her belongings." Mrs. Sinclair let out a loud, theatrical sigh, fanning herself with a lace handkerchief. Oh please. This is ridiculous. She probably staged this whole thing just to ruin my Melody's special day. Officer, you don't know that girl. She's a pathological liar. She's been faking illnesses and playing the victim since she was 8 years old. Ma'am, Detective Vance said, his tone icy enough to freeze water. The coroner has already completed the initial post-mortem examination. The deceased suffered from a massive long-standing intracranial hematoma, a blood clot the size of a golf ball pressing directly into her brain stem. Her body weight at the time of death was 82 pounds. Her internal organs showed signs of total systemic failure due to chronic physical trauma and untreated stage 4 neurological necrosis. You cannot fake an autopsy. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Melody's hand, which was still holding Xavier's arm, tightened in panic. Xavier, don't listen to them. Eva always loved using cheap tricks to get attention. Xavier didn't hear her. His gaze was locked onto the clear plastic evidence bag in the officer's hand. Inside it sat the rusted metal box. He knew that box. 3 years ago, when they lived in that damp, miserable basement in Brooklyn, Eva had found that little metal tea tin in a trash pile. She had cleaned it, polished it, and proudly told him it would be their treasure chest, where they would keep their marriage license once he got better. Give me that, Xavier said. His voice didn't sound like his own. It was raspy, hollow, stripped of all authority. Sir, this is evidence. I said give it to me, Xavier roared, stepping off the stage so violently that he nearly knocked over the multi-tiered wedding cake. The crowd parted in terror. Xavier snatched the plastic bag from the officer's hand. His fingers were shaking so badly he could barely unseal the Ziploc strip. He tipped the contents onto the pristine white tablecloth of the nearest banquet table. A broken, dirt-caked hearing aid clattered against the fine china. Alongside it lay 2 folded, blood-stained documents, crisp with age and dried fluid. Xavier grabbed the first document. It was a loan contract dated 3 years ago from Apex Financial, a known front for the mob boss Victor Rossi. The principal amount, $10 million. The borrower's signature, Eva Sinclair. The collateral, her right eye, kidney, and full personal liberty. Underneath the signature was a thumbprint stamped in dried, dark red blood. Xavier's heart slammed against his ribs like a trapped beast. No, this is fake. She took $10 million from Rossi to abandon me. She slapped me. She said I was a cripple. Keep reading, Mr. Knight, Detective Vance said quietly, stepping up beside him. We pulled the bank records associated with that loan this morning before coming here. Xavier's hands trembled so violently he almost tore the second piece of paper. It was an official wire transfer receipt from Apex Financial. The $10 million had never gone to Eva's personal bank account. It had been wired directly to the Swiss Medical Center in Zurich, to the exact account that paid for Xavier's experimental neural surgery 3 years ago. The remitter, Eva Sinclair. The beneficiary, Xavier Knight. The date of the transfer was the exact same day she had walked into their basement, slapped him across the face, thrown a stack of cash at him, and told him she was leaving him for a richer man. Xavier stared at the wire receipt. The numbers blurred before his eyes. His vision swam with spots of red and black. $10 million. Wired to Zurich. For his brain surgery. Xavier. Melody's voice sounded high-pitched, panicked. She rushed forward, trying to grab the paper from his hand. Xavier, don't look at that trash. It's forged. She forged it. I was the one who got you the money from my family's trust fund. Remember? I gave you the check. Xavier slowly turned his head to look at Melody. For 6 months, he had treated this woman like a saint. He had bought her diamonds, handed her his company's shares, and protected her like precious glass. You gave me the check? Xavier whispered, his voice dangerously low. Yes, of course. Melody stammered, backing away slightly from the terrifying look in his eyes. My parents helped me raise the funds. Officer, Xavier said, his eyes never leaving Melody's face. The third paper. In that bag. Read it to me. Detective Vance picked up a small, yellowed index card that had fallen out of the rusted box. It's a hospital critical condition notice from New York General Hospital dated 3 years ago, November 14th. The detective read aloud in a cold, professional tone. Patient, Eva Sinclair. Admitted with acute head trauma, multiple fractured ribs, internal bleeding, and irreversible damage to the right auditory nerve, caused by repeated blunt force impact. Patient claims injuries were sustained during a physical assault by collectors from Apex Financial. The detective paused, looking around the room before reading the handwritten doctor's note at the bottom. Patient refused pain medication and discharged herself against medical advice within 3 hours of regaining consciousness, stating she needed to deliver the Zurich receipt before he wakes up. Bang. Xavier's champagne glass shattered against the floor as his grip crushed the thin crystal. Shards of glass sliced deep into his palm, blood dripping onto the white tablecloth, but he didn't feel it. He remembered that night. November 14th. He remembered waking up in the basement, feverish and delirious from his brain tumor. He remembered Eva walking through the door. Her hair had been messy, covering the right side of her face. She had worn an oversized coat. A coat he now realized was soaked through with her own blood. She had stood over his bed, slapped him, thrown money at him, and sneered. "I'm done with you, Xavier. A rich man bought me for 10 million. You're just a pathetic loser." He had hated her for 3 years. He had built an empire on that hatred. He had sworn to make her pay. And all the while, her right ear had been bleeding under her hair because Rossi's men had smashed her head against a concrete wall while he lay safely in bed. "Xavier." Melody tried to touch his arm. She was just slap. The sound echoed through the entire ballroom like a gunshot. Xavier's backhand struck Melody so hard she was knocked off her feet, crashing into the cake table. White frosting and red wine spilled all over her wedding dress. "Melody." "Mrs. Sinclair shrieked, rushing to her daughter's side. "Are you crazy, Xavier? You struck my daughter." Xavier turned on Mrs. Sinclair, his eyes completely bloodshot, filled with a murderous, unhinged fury that made the older woman instantly drop to her knees in fear. "Where is she?" Xavier rasped, grabbing Detective Vance by his leather jacket. "Where is Eva? Take me to her. Take me to her now." The city morgue in Queens smelled of formaldehyde, industrial bleach, and frozen iron. Xavier walked down the concrete corridor behind the medical examiner. He refused to wear a coat, despite the freezing temperature of the basement vault. His black suit was stained with his own dried blood from his palm and white frosting from the ruined engagement party. He looked like a corpse walking among corpses. "We brought her in at 4 a.m., the medical examiner said softly, pulling open a heavy stainless steel door. The motel manager found her because the water from her room had been running continuously, leaking through the ceiling below. The examiner stopped in front of a metal tray labeled unidentified/Sinclair. Mr. Knight, I must warn you. She suffered extreme malnutrition and physical neglect before her death. Her appearance." "Open it," Xavier commanded. His voice was dead flat, completely stripped of humanity. The examiner slowly pulled back the white linen sheet. Xavier's breath caught in his throat, choking him. The woman lying on the steel tray didn't look like Eva. The girl he remembered from 3 years ago had round, soft cheeks, bright brown eyes, and hair that smelled like cheap lavender shampoo. The body before him was a skeleton wrapped in translucent, paper-thin skin. Her cheeks were hollowed out, her collarbones jutting out like broken branches. Her lips were cracked and blue. Dried blood still caked in the corners of her mouth. Her right wrist was covered in thick, dark purple bruises, the bruises left by his leather shoes when he had ground his soul into her fingers 2 nights ago at the VIP lounge. Xavier slowly reached out a trembling hand. His fingers touched her forehead. She was ice cold. "Eva," he whispered. No response. The silent room offered no echo. He looked down at her ears. Her right ear was small, pale, and completely misshapen from old, hardened scar tissue, the result of a ruptured eardrum that had never been treated by a doctor. And on her head, hidden beneath her thin, brittle hair, was a massive, angry, purple bulge near the base of her skull. "This." Xavier's voice cracked. "This was the clot." "Yes," the medical examiner said gently. "It was an old injury. At least 3 years old. A severe blunt force trauma caused deep arterial bleeding in the subarachnoid space. It slowly hardened into a solid mass, cutting off blood flow to her optic nerves and auditory pathways." The examiner sighed, looking at his clipboard. "Frankly, Mr. Knight, it's a medical miracle she survived this long. The pain must have been unimaginable. Over the past 6 months, as the mass expanded, she would have experienced blinding migraines, total loss of balance, vomiting, blood, and gradual paralysis." 6 months. Xavier's knees buckled. He slammed against the edge of the steel tray, holding himself up by sheer willpower. 6 months ago was the exact time he had returned to New York as a billionaire. For the past 6 months, he had forced her to dance in skimpy outfits at private parties. He had made her drink heavy liquor until she threw up. He had forced her to kneel on hard glass fragments to pick up $1,000 bills he threw at her feet. When she stumbled, he called her a drunk. When she couldn't hear him call her name, he called her a deaf idiot playing dumb. When she vomited in the bathroom, he accused her of trying to get out of her work. She was dying. Xavier sobbed, his chest heaving as tears finally burst from his eyes, burning like acid. She was dying the whole time. And I killed her. "Mr. Knight." Detective Vance stepped forward, holding a small plastic bag containing her personal effects found in the motel room. The room was completely empty except for a single bottle of cheap over-the-counter painkillers, an empty glass, and this. The officer pulled out a receipt from the evidence bag. It was a bank transfer receipt dated 4 days ago, the day after Xavier had thrown the $50,000 credit card at her face and told her to get out of New York. Eva had transferred every single cent, all $50,000, along with her remaining life savings of $12,000, to the St. Jude Orphanage for girls. The memo on the transfer read, "For the children's winter coats. Tell them Sister Eva went on a long journey and won't be back." Xavier grabbed the paper, pressing it against his face, weeping hysterically in the freezing, silent morgue. She hadn't spent a single penny of his money on herself. She hadn't bought food. She hadn't rented a decent room. She hadn't even bought real pain medication. She had lived in a cold, dark motel room, chewing off her own lips in agony, starving to death, just so she could leave every dime behind for orphaned children. And he had called her a gold digger. 3 days later, the headquarters of Knight Enterprises in downtown Manhattan was usually a hive of silent, high-stakes corporate efficiency. But today the executive floor smelled like stale liquor and ash. Xavier sat behind his massive mahogany desk. He hadn't slept for 72 hours. His eyes were bloodshot, his beard unkempt, his suit rumpled. His left hand was roughly bandaged where the glass had cut him, dried blood seeping through the white gauze. On the floor in front of his desk, 2 people were kneeling, shivering in absolute terror. Mrs. Sinclair and Melody. Behind them stood 4 imposing, black-suited security guards, blocking the exit. "Xavier, please." Mrs. Sinclair wept, her face pale, her expensive makeup ruined by tears. We didn't know. We didn't know Eva was sick. If we had known, we would have helped her." Xavier didn't say a word. He slowly poured himself a glass of neat bourbon, the ice clinking against the glass with a terrifying, rhythmic sound. "You didn't know?" Xavier's voice was dangerously smooth, like silk covering a razor blade. He pressed a button on his desk intercom. The door opened, and an elderly man in a white medical coat walked in, flanked by 2 corporate lawyers. It was Dr. Harrison, the former head of pediatrics at New York Presbyterian. "Dr. Harrison," Xavier said without looking up, "tell my guests about Eva's childhood." The doctor looked at Mrs. Sinclair with disgust before opening his folder. "Eva Sinclair was brought to our clinic 20 years ago by Mrs. Sinclair," the doctor read in a cold voice. "Not for treatment but for compatibility testing. The Sinclairs had adopted Eva from the St. Jude Orphanage specifically because her rare blood type and tissue profile matched their biological daughter, Melody." The doctor turned a page. Over the next 12 years, Eva underwent 6 major invasive medical procedures, including 2 bone marrow extractions and blood plasma harvesting, all performed without proper recovery time, to treat Melody's chronic organ fragility. When Eva turned 18, her health was already severely compromised. Xavier set his glass down. Clink. Melody gasped, shrinking back. "Xavier, that was my parents' decision. I was just a child. I didn't know." "You didn't know?" Xavier finally looked at Melody. His eyes were completely devoid of human warmth. They looked like the eyes of a dead predator. He pulled out a thick ledger from his drawer and threw it onto the floor in front of her. "That is the full financial audit of Victor Rossi's mob network, which my legal team seized yesterday morning," Xavier said softly. 3 years ago, when Eva took out that $10 million loan to save my life, who was the person who informed the loan sharks where she lived?" Melody froze. Her breath hitched. "It was you, Melody," Xavier whispered, leaning forward over his desk. "You tracked her to the mob office. You saw her sign the contract. And the moment the money was wired to Zurich, you called Victor Rossi and told him that Eva was planning to flee the country with his cash." No, that's a lie," Melody shrieked, her voice cracking. "That's why Rossi's men ambushed her in that alley." Xavier slammed his fist onto the desk, his roar echoing through the entire skyscraper. "That's why they beat her head with a steel pipe until her ear bled. Because you told them she was running away." "Xavier, mercy, please." Mrs. Sinclair threw herself forward, grabbing the edge of his desk. "We are Melody's parents. We are your future in-laws." "In-laws?" Xavier let out a sudden, chilling laugh that turned into a cough. He nodded to his head lawyer. "As of 8 a.m. this morning," the lawyer stated calmly, "Knight Enterprises has acquired 98% of Sinclair Global's outstanding debt. We have initiated immediate foreclosure proceedings on all Sinclair family assets, including your Manhattan townhome, your summer estate in the Hamptons, and your personal bank accounts." "What?" Mrs. Sinclair shrieked. "You can't do this. We'll be homeless." "You won't be homeless," Xavier said, his voice dropping to an icy whisper. "The personally rented a small, damp basement apartment in Brooklyn for you. It's the exact same basement where Eva and I lived 3 years ago. The heat doesn't work, and the roof leaks when it rains." He leaned down, looking directly into Melody's terrified eyes. "And as for you, Melody, the district attorney's office has just unsealed an indictment against you for grand fraud, corporate theft, and accessory to aggravated assault resulting in death. The police are waiting downstairs in the lobby." "No, Xavier. No. I love you. I did it all because I loved you," Melody screamed, flailing as the 4 security guards stepped forward and grabbed her arms, dragging her toward the door. "You didn't love me," Xavier said, turning his back on her to face the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gray city skyline. "You loved my money, and now you have nothing." The night was pitch black. Xavier sat alone in the private VIP lounge of the Velvet Room, the exclusive nightclub where he had spent the last 6 months torturing Eva. The lounge was empty. The flashing neon lights were turned off, leaving only the dull glow of a single floor lamp. On the table in front of him sat a glass of whiskey and a laptop. Xavier's hand hovered over the spacebar. His head investigator had managed to retrieve the raw, unedited security footage from the club servers for the past 6 months. Xavier hadn't slept in 4 days, but he forced his eyes to stay open. He pressed play. The video on the screen was dated 3 months ago. The lounge was filled with wealthy, laughing businessmen. In the center of the room stood Eva. She was wearing a silver, backless sequin dress that was far too big for her frail frame. Her hands were holding a tray filled with heavy shots of tequila. Xavier watched his own reflection on the screen. On the screen, the 3 months ago Xavier was sitting on the leather sofa, arm around a high society woman, looking at Eva with utter disgust. "Hey gold digger," the on-screen Xavier said, tossing a stack of $100 bills onto the sticky floor. "Finish this entire bottle of bourbon in 2 minutes and the cash is yours." Xavier watched as Eva hesitated. She looked at the bottle, then at the money on the floor. Her left ear turned slightly toward him. She was trying so hard to catch his words with her one working ear. Then she picked up the bottle and began to drink. She drank until her face turned red, until she gasped for air, tears streaming down her cheeks. The men in the room cheered and laughed, clapping as if watching an animal perform a trick. When she finished the bottle, her knees buckled, and she fell hard onto the floor, her hands landing right on top of broken glass from a shattered champagne flute. On the screen, the past Xavier didn't even stand up. He just sneered. "Pathetic. Get up and dance, or you don't get the money." Present-day Xavier stared at the screen, his breathing ragged. He zoomed in on Eva's face in the video. In high definition, he could now see what he had been too blinded by hatred to see back then. As she lay on the floor, her right hand was pressed tightly against the back of her head. Her lips were moving, whispering something over and over again while the men laughed around her. Xavier pulled up the audio track, cranking the volume up to maximum, filtering out the background noise of the club. Her tiny, trembling voice came through the speakers, soft and clear. "It hurts, Xavier. My head hurts so much. Please. I paid your bills. Why do you hate me so much?" "Arg." Xavier let out a gut-wrenching, animalistic scream. He slammed his fists onto the laptop, crushing the screen, tearing the hinges apart, but the audio kept playing in his mind, echoing off the dark walls of the empty VIP room. "Why do you hate me so much? My head hurts so much." He fell to his knees on the very same carpet where she had bled 3 months ago. He clawed at the floorboards, digging his fingernails into the fabric until his fingers bled, pressing his face into the cold carpet. "I'm sorry. Eva. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." He wept into the empty room until his throat bled, until he had no tears left to cry, but the silent darkness offered him no forgiveness. The winter snow had begun to fall over New York, blanketing the dreary brick buildings of Queens in a quiet layer of white. A black luxury limousine pulled up to the rusty gates of the St. Jude orphanage for girls. Xavier stepped out of the car. He wore a simple black coat, holding a small leather briefcase. He looked gaunt, his cheeks hollow, his eyes sunken into deep black sockets. The matron of the orphanage, Sister Agnes, an elderly woman with silver hair and a warm, sad smile, was waiting for him at the wooden door. "Mr. Knight," Sister Agnes said gently. "I received your call." "Sister." Xavier's voice was barely a rasp. Did she leave anything else here?" Before he couldn't bring himself to say the word died. Sister Agnes sighed softly, stepping aside to let him inside the warm, wood-paneled hallway. "Eva came here 2 weeks ago," Sister Agnes said, leading him down a narrow corridor lined with children's finger paintings. "She sat right there in the chapel for 3 hours just listening to the choir practice. She couldn't hear the music very well, poor child. She kept pressing her left ear against the wooden bench to feel the vibrations. Xavier felt a sharp, stabbing pain in his chest. She brought a box, the sister continued, opening the door to a small storage room. She told me that if anyone ever came asking about her after she left, I should give it to them. She said she knew you would come. Eventually. Sister Agnes pointed to a small, dusty cardboard box sitting on a wooden chair. Xavier walked over, his knees trembling with every step. He knelt beside the chair and lifted the lid. Inside were a few simple items. A faded photograph of him and Eva from college, taken on a disposable camera in Central Park. She was smiling, leaning her head against his shoulder. A knitted wool scarf, the very first scarf she had made for him during their first winter. In the basement, half finished because she hadn't had enough money to buy the second roll of yarn. And at the bottom of the box was a small, battery-powered voice recorder. Xavier's hand hovered over the recorder for a long time. Finally, with shaking fingers, he picked it up and pressed the red play button. Static. Then, her voice came through the tiny speaker. It was weak, raspy, interrupted by long pauses where she gasped for breath. Xavier, if you're listening to this, it means I'm gone, and you finally found out the truth. I'm sorry I lied to you 3 years ago. I'm sorry I slapped you. I knew if I told you I borrowed money from Rossi, you would have refused the surgery. You always had too much pride. A soft, painful chuckle sounded on the tape, followed by the sound of coughing. The doctor told me yesterday that the blood clot in my head is too big now. I don't have much time left. My right ear hasn't heard a sound in 3 years, and my left ear is fading too. Soon, my world will be completely silent. I went to see you at your company last week from across the street. You looked so handsome in your tailored suit, Xavier. You looked healthy. You weren't coughing anymore. Your brain surgery worked. That was all I ever wanted. Xavier pressed the recorder against his chest, dropping his head onto the wooden chair, his body shaking uncontrollably with silent, agonized sobs. I know you hate me now. I know you think I'm a horrible, greedy woman. That's okay. It's better if you hate me than if you mourn me. Don't feel guilty about the things you said to me at the club. I know you were just hurt. Xavier, please live a good life. Marry someone who truly loves you. Eat well. Don't work too late. If there is a next life, don't come looking for me. I'm too tired. I just want to rest. Goodbye, my love. Click. The tape went silent. The small storage room was completely quiet, save for the sound of the winter wind howling against the window glass. Xavier lay on the cold floor of the storage room, clutching the recorder against his heart, weeping until the dark night swallowed him whole. 2 days later, a private cemetery on a quiet hill overlooking the Hudson River was wrapped in a thick blanket of morning fog. There were no reporters, no high society guests, no grand speeches. A single mahogany casket was slowly lowered into the dark, rich earth. Xavier stood at the edge of the grave, wearing a black coat, holding a single branch of white lavender, her favorite flower. Beside him stood 12 young girls from the St. Jude orphanage dressed in clean, warm winter coats that had been purchased with her final donation. They held small white candles, their faces quiet and somber. Sister Agnes stood beside the priest, reading a short prayer. Mrs. Sinclair and Melody were nowhere to be seen. They were currently sitting in a state holding facility, awaiting their respective trials for bankruptcy fraud and criminal conspiracy. The Sinclair name had been completely erased from New York's elite circles, their assets liquidated to pay off Eva's old mob debts and fund an endowment for the orphanage. When the prayer finished, the children stepped forward one by one, dropping their small white candles onto the casket. Xavier knelt by the edge of the grave. He slowly reached out and placed the branch of white lavender onto the polished wood. Eva, he whispered, his voice disappearing into the cold wind. I paid off the mob. I ruined the Sinclairs. I built a children's hospital in your name. He closed his eyes, fresh tears cutting through the grime on his hollow cheeks. But none of it matters, because you aren't here to see it. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, broken hearing aid that had been recovered from her motel room. He held it gently in his palm, pressing it against his ear, the same right ear, where she had suffered her quiet, agonizing deafness for 3 years. He heard nothing, only the cold, empty whistle of the wind. I will listen to the silence for you, Xavier whispered to the cold earth. For the rest of my life. 1 year later, New York was caught in the grip of another brutal winter. In a quiet, rundown neighborhood in Brooklyn, a black luxury sedan sat parked outside a small, brick apartment building. The building was old, its walls covered in peeling paint and rust. The driver opened the rear door, but the man sitting in the back didn't step out right away. It was Xavier. He looked 10 years older than his 30 years. His hair was streaked with silver at the temples, his frame thin and gaunt under a simple wool coat. He had resigned from his position as CEO of Knight Enterprises 6 months ago, transferring his entire multi-billion-dollar fortune into a perpetual trust for brain trauma research and orphan care. He walked down the narrow concrete steps leading into the basement apartment. He unlocked the heavy iron door and stepped inside. The basement was small, dark, and damp. The air smelled of concrete and old dust. There was no luxury furniture here. No velvet sofas, no crystal chandeliers. Only a narrow iron bed frame, a small wooden table, and a rusty radiator that clanked loudly in the corner. This was where they had lived 4 years ago. Xavier walked over to the wooden table, set down his briefcase, and sat on the edge of the narrow bed. He pulled out the rusted metal box, now polished clean, and set it in the center of the table. Beside it sat 2 items: a framed photograph of Eva smiling in Central Park, and an official court judgment detailing Melody Sinclair's 20-year prison sentence for criminal conspiracy, alongside Mrs. Sinclair's eviction notice into public welfare housing. Xavier didn't look at the court papers. He only looked at the photograph. Every night he slept here, on this cold iron bed. Every night he refused to turn on the heat, letting the freezing winter air numb his bones, using the physical discomfort to escape the suffocating weight of his guilt. His doctor said his own brain condition was returning, that the stress and lack of sleep had caused a new blood clot to form near his brain stem. They warned him that without immediate surgery, he had less than a year to live. He had refused the surgery. Xavier reached out his thin, pale hand and touched the glass of the photo frame, his thumb tracing Eva's bright, unbothered smile. "Eva," he murmured in the quiet basement. "The doctors say I'll be coming to see you soon." He closed his eyes, listening to the clanking of the old radiator, feeling the cold wind seep through the cracked window pane. For the first time in 4 years, the terrifying, agonizing ringing in his heart seemed to fade away, replaced by a deep, absolute quiet. In the dark, silent basement, he closed his eyes and drifted into a long, dreamless sleep, holding her photograph tightly against his chest, as the snow fell softly outside, covering the world in pure unbroken white.